When I was first asked to speak about 5 teachings of the Rebbe that people can incorporate into their daily lives, I was pleased. It's something I've thought about a lot. I wrote about in my book on Rebbe. But then, when I was told I have also only 5 minutes to do these 5 teachings, I must admit I got a little intimidated. The only thing that gave me some chizuk, some strength, was the famous story in the Talmud where a non-Jew asks Hillel to define Judaism's essence while standing on one foot. Hillel does so and then adds to the man, Zeal Gemar, now go and study. So on the presumption that you're all going to be people who are going to be studying a lot more about the Rebbe, I have the strength to try and give 5 teachings in the next 5 minutes. But I am going to move quickly. Number 1, empowering people and communicating leadership skills. When he was in his early 20s, Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, who was not yet a rabbi and became, of course, the very famous chief rabbi of England and a great Jewish scholar, met with the Rebbe. And in passing, he said to the Rebbe, I recently found myself in a situation. And the Rebbe said to him, don't use those words, they're too passive. You placed yourself in a situation. Because if you can place yourself in one situation, then you can place yourself in another situation. In other words, the Rebbe was always wanting to empower people, to not just see themselves as victims of circumstances. Applies to all of us. We don't just find ourselves in a situation, and when we are in a situation, what do we do to change that situation? Number 2, the Rebbe was addicted to the use of positive language. People ask me, did something change in your life? Many things changed in my life because of writing this book on the Rebbe. But I'll tell you one word I don't use anymore. And believe me, if you're a writer, it's a very commonly used word. I stopped using the word deadline. The Rebbe didn't like that word, and with good reason. Look at the connotation, deadline. What did I start using instead? Due date. Due date connotes birth. Deadline connotes death. A man once met with the Rebbe complaining about his son and all the problems with his son and how disappointed he was in his son, and the son was not even particularly Jewishly involved anymore. And he said to the Rebbe, you know what they say, it's hard to be a Jew. The Rebbe said, do you often use that expression? And the man said, well, it is hard to be a Jew. And the Rebbe said, so why are you surprised then that your son isn't so enthusiastic about being Jewish? Why don't you try to say, it's gut zu sein a Yid, it's good to be a Jew, and communicate an enthusiasm about Jewish life and Jewish living, and an enthusiasm that will inflame and excite you in your own life. 3, how to disagree without being disagreeable. A rabbi once wrote a letter to the Rebbe about a sharp disagreement he had with the Rebbe. And the Rebbe answered him and said, just remember, there are still 612 areas in which we agree. What was so central to the Rebbe's approach was the search for commonalities. What is one of the things that's having such a damaging impact on American life today, and in Israel too, is people focus always on differences. And differences become the most important issue suddenly. The Rebbe wanted to focus on commonality, and to boot, he never attacked people by name. The Rebbe's approach was he didn't speak about people. He spoke about shitot. He spoke about approaches. He spoke about issues. And you know how much easier it made then to reconcile with people, or to not even have to reconcile because you don't have a fight? Don't attack individuals. There is such a tendency in Jewish life, in American life, in Israeli life, to always focus on the differences. Focus on the commonalities. And when you focus on the commonalities, you don't go around attacking individuals. You focus on areas where you can find agreement. There's a common expression in American life. I suspect many of you who are listening here, I'm going to ask you to fill in the last word. I'm going to start a sentence and I want you to fill in the last word. Anything worth doing is worth doing. What people then normally say is well. That's exactly what most of us learned from our parents. Anything worth doing is worth doing well. The Rebbe had a subtle difference. Anything worth doing is worth doing now. When Rabbi Shapsi Katz from South Africa in the late 70s came to the Rebbe, he was a prison chaplain, and the Rebbe urged him to allow the prisons in South Africa to allow the Jewish prisoners to light Hanukkah candles, which they couldn't do. And the Rebbe said, do you know how important it is for somebody who's in the darkness of a prison cell to have that light that comes out of the Hanukkah candles? He so moved Katz that Katz said he was going to do everything the following year to get the prisons to allow it, because now it was only a day before Hanukkah. So the Rebbe said, well, what about this year? He said, well, it's too late. The Rebbe said to him, why don't you call the head of the prisons? He was with the Rebbe in Brooklyn, so he would have to call South Africa. He said, it's the middle of the night. The Rebbe said, even better. If you call the head of the prisons in the middle of the night, he'll realize it must be something very important. The man didn't want to make the call. None of us would want to make such a call. But he did it. It was hard to not listen to the Rebbe when the Rebbe spoke in such a direct manner. And he succeeded. The man realized this rabbi was not normally a pest. If he's calling in the middle of the night, because as he said, a great rabbi has told me to do it. And he acceded to the request. And an order went out that morning that all Jews who wanted to light candles in any prison in South Africa should be permitted to do so. Think about it again in your own lives. You can incorporate this. Anything worth doing is worth doing now, be it a telephone call you know you should make, a meeting you know you should have. Do it now. And fifth and finally, find the love and the things you can love about in the people you meet and things you can respect. When Israel Meir Lau, who later on became one of the really major, very significant chief rabbi of Israel, when he was a young man, a newly ordained rabbi, he came to meet with the Rebbe. And the Rebbe asked him what he was doing. He said, I'm involved in Kiruv Rechokim. I'm involved in bringing back those who are far away near. It's a term commonly used in religious life to refer to influencing people who are not particularly observant religiously to come back to leading a more Jewish life. The Rebbe didn't like the language. He didn't like the judgmentalism inherent in the term, I'm involved in Kiruv Rechokim. He says, how do we know who's near and who's far? Everybody, they're all very dear in God's eyes. 5 lessons, 5 things we can incorporate into our life. Thank you.